I honestly don't really know how to start this off. I'm not normally someone who tends to post odd experiences or even typical things that happen in my day-to-day life, but given the circumstances, I feel that I need to share this. Now, before I get into this, I want to warn you all that I don't really recall too many details from the tape itself, as it's been nearly 7 or so years since I last viewed the contents of it in its entirety. So I do apologize if some of the details may or may not make too much sense. As for how I found this thing, all I know is that it was an accidental find in some kind of abandoned house that me and a few of my mates were digging around to try and find anything worth taking with us. Yeah, not a very smart or legal move in the long run, but I was 14 at the time and wasn't exactly the most supervised kid at the time, so things like running around and trying to find and loot random crap to take home with me was a bit of an interest of mine. Again, the details are a bit fuzzy, but the only thing I do actually recall was taking a huge box of assorted items with me that I had managed to swipe at one of the houses that we had decided to explore, and the tape just so happened to be one of those items. As for the tape itself, it was pretty banged up from the years of likely being tossed and thrown around by other people who likely traversed the house before us, for either urban exploration or just full-on looting. I was honestly surprised that it even played to begin with. The contents of the tape were interesting, to say the least. I don't know if what I saw was even an episode or not, but what I can recall was that it involved something like Max from the show Max and Ruby having to stay home alone for the day while Ruby went out to go and get groceries from the store for some bullshit cake she was trying to make for some dumbass party of hers that she was going to throw for her dolls. The rest of the episode basically played out like how you would imagine a little 4-year-old toddler would likely react to being home alone for the day. It started off rather simply, with Max getting that little mischievous look on his face that he typically gets, and going to gather all of his toys to play with in the living room. I remember that the tape would start to cut in and out at random intervals of him playing with his toys and going into the kitchen to raid the pantry and refrigerator for any kind of snacks to munch on while he played. This went on for a good bit of the episode before finally steadying itself enough to actually play normally. As the episode continued, Max would simply continue to play in the living room before ultimately growing bored and then going upstairs to do something else. As that was going, there was something that started to form on one of the corners of the screen. A rather small black mass. Nothing particularly noticeable at first unless you managed to catch it on the right angle, but still there nonetheless. As the episode continued on forward, the outside view of the house via the window would cut to show it being nighttime, with Max growing more and more concerned and even slightly frightened at times, usually because of some small noises that would play out that would typically scare a little 4-year-old kid. It's then that Max would come out of his room and step into the darkened hallway, the black mass in the corner of the screen getting a little bit bigger during that. When he stepped into the hallway, the scene started tilting and moving at some rather odd angles and then began to do the typical jumping thing that VHS tapes tend to do when the film starts to deteriorate a bit. Basically a jumping scene, if you know what I mean. It was rather hard to make out what was going on for most of it, but the one thing I do really remember was Max starting to hallucinate a bit. Which, given how he was a 4-year-old kid alone in a darkened house by himself, it wasn't exactly that shocking that started to happen. After a second or two of the angles twisting in on themselves and then finally clearing out, his toy lobster came out of one of the rooms, rather giant-sized, and began to chase Max around the house. Now, for the rest of the tape, the audio was pretty much muted at this point, so I only had the visuals to look at for the last remaining few minutes of whatever the fuck was going on in this episode. As the toy lobster was chasing Max, the black mass started to envelope the rest of the screen more and more as the lobster toys showed up in each scene. Max, looking very scared and distressed, attempted to try and cry out, very likely for Ruby, but of course, as you would expect, she never showed up. The final bit of the episode was the thing that really stuck into my head, given the unnerving nature of it. The final scene originally had been officially engulfed in the black mass once Max fell down on the ground after tripping on his toy ambulance in the living room. At first, I thought that the episode had officially concluded, and well, I was dead fucking wrong, as a loud and resounding "No!" from Max played out from my TV speakers that caused me to jump. More out of surprise and slight shock rather than fear, although, looking back on it, it still sends a bit of a chill down my spine. Now, I'm sure that there was supposed to be more in this episode, but I guess you could say, as luck would have it, the episode completely cut out and then proceeded to play a segment of some football game that had apparently been taped over, before finally ending with the typical VHS blue screen and the tape rewinding itself. After that rather weird experience, the only thing that went through my mind at the time was, what the actual fuck did I watch? Before going into a sudden fit of laughter due to the sheer amount of tomfuckery that had just transpired all in one tape. While I will admit that whatever the hell this episode was pretty unnerving, it was also exceedingly interesting as well. I don't know and still don't know what the hell I watched, but one thing was for sure, that I had definitely planned on showing it to my friends the next day just to play around a bit and maybe be a bit of a dick for the hell of it. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. The reason? Well, my parents wind up finding out the little explorations that I and my friends had been doing due to one of my so-called friends snitching on me and telling their parents about what we had been doing. And of course, where I'd been going, and then proceeded to scream at me for nearly 5 minutes for, quote, stealing someone else's property, how you shouldn't trespass on other people's lawn, and so on and so forth, until ultimately in the end, I was pretty much grounded for the rest of the year because of it. My father, even in a fit of rage, wound up taking the tape out of the VHS tape rather violently, and everything else that I had procured throughout the years. In fact, he even made me point out everything that I had actually taken under the threat of a much-needed ass-whooping, and proceeded to take it to the local dump and trashed everything that I had. And despite multiple attempts of me and my friends going out to the dump to try and find it, we never were able to find the tape, and honestly, likely, we never will. While I'm not too surprised that it happened, I mean, I was bound to get caught sometime around, I was still pretty pissed off that I hadn't been able to find it again. Although, even if I did find it, it's very likely that it would have been damaged beyond repair anyway from potentially getting crushed by pounds and mountains of garbage and various sharp objects likely penetrating and destroying the tape, ripping it to pieces. Not to mention that the film itself was already kind of fucked up beyond repair, so there's that too. Although, despite everything, I still to this day wonder what the hell was on the rest of that tape. I mean, what the fuck was even on that episode, and what could it have had? And more importantly, who the hell even made it, and more importantly, why? I know for a full-fledged fact that this wasn't an official episode, so very likely someone probably made this, but even then, a lot of questions never really got answered. Although in retrospect, I guess I'll never really know for sure. And honestly, maybe that's probably for the better.
In fear and surprise as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave. Glued to your computer screen, the killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping horde-driven nightmarish gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent scream. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at